Greetings and welcome to Flanagan's Ecologic podcast. I am your host, Ted Flanagan, and today I'm joined by Joyce Coffee. She is the founder and president of Climate Resilience Consulting, and they are catalyzing resilience, which is fantastic. She's just come out with a new book, The Resilience Advantage, a guide for small businesses preparing for a climate disaster. She wrote it with her colleague, Robert Mackney. And I'm delighted to have you, Joyce, on the show and to talk not only about your background, but about how resilience can actually be a business advantage, which is a terrific way of looking at it. So welcome to the podcast.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here, Ted. I am a super fan, and I think it's really incredible that you get the best out of the people that you interview.
Well, I try. Sometimes I have to use my pliers, right? like a dentist.
You're a man who knows your tools, so that's great.
So I think you're in the Chicago area. Is that right?
Yes, beautiful day here.
Is it? And how many years have you been in Chicago? Is this?
About 25. So I feel like I'm a native. In particular, I worked for a time at the city of Chicago. So when you work for the city, you really become I fell in love, Now I think it's my top mate.
And you're probably not a football fan, but everybody gets swept up with the Bears, right?
Yes, the Bears. And we have a TV show called The Bear that everyone's swept up in now. So, but it's not about football. It's about food, which is another really wonderful part about Chicago. I know more about the food part of Chicago than I did the football part.
Than the football. When I grew up in New York, and I was not really a sports person at all. Well, I was an ice hockey person, but not a football person. But I came to Colorado, and I just fell in love with the Denver Broncos because you just get swept up. And now you were born and raised in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, maybe I'll date myself, but I will say that John Elway was the bomb when I was a kid, and he was the quarterback for the Broncos. But yeah, we didn't do as much football watching in my family. We were big on going outside into the mountains, which was a wonderful way to grow up.
Well, before we leave John Elway, number 7, and I still nickname my kids Elway. Right?
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, and McCaffrey, and we love it. But how did you go from Boulder to, I think you went to college at Tufts in Boston?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, I was keen to be involved with public health, and Tufts University has a big, medical school, but also a big focus on public health. And I didn't emerge with that degree, actually. I began to focus more on environment, but I was really keen on understanding how the environment and human health intersected. So it was a great place to be, and I really loved being on the East Coast for school.
Yeah. And I think during your Tufts tenure, you were majoring also in Asian studies.
Yeah, wow.
And you went to University of Hanoi, is that right?
Oh my gosh, you have done your research.
Study abroad there? I thought that's so interesting.
It was such really, literally, it still comes up as one of the most important moments in my life when I turned 21 in Hanoi, Vietnam, when I was one of maybe 2 Americans in the entire city at the time.
Wow.
So that was kind of weird. I was super interested in matrilineal places, places that kind of privileged women. And I was also eager to go to a place that spoke French. And at the time, there were still French speakers living in Hanoi. Now, many of them, of course, passed away. That was, sort of a relic of their colonial past with France. So I was over there and tripping the light fantastic, learned a teeny bit of Vietnamese, but the most impressive part of that experience was that I earned some incredible friendships that, I have to this day. I just said goodbye to a girlfriend who was here with her family.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's been a really wonderful kind of red thread through my career that focus on not just the U.S. experience, but also the experience of Vietnam.
That's great. Did you go directly to MIT then after that?
No, I actually took a couple years, and I was working for a program called the U.S.-Asia Environmental Partnership. It was a really interesting experience. I was focused, the program itself was run by USAID with a very specific partnership between EPA and the Foreign Commercial Service, so the Department of Commerce. And the aim of that program was to help South Asian, East Asian, and Southeast Asian economies to essentially leapfrog our industrial revolution by providing sustainability resources, whether that was training or access to US technologies. It was a really cool experience. And I lived overseas as part of that as a very young person. I mean, I had, as you know, just noted, I was living in Vietnam for when I was really young, but then, in my mid 20s, I was living in the Philippines and working in all these countries, and wow, it was so cool.
Golly. Remember that TV show, What's My Line? Yeah, sure. I don't think this lady went to University of Hanoi and lived in the
I know.
Philippines. I don't think so. Okay, but then MIT, and that's when is that more of a planning degree?
Yeah, right. I got my planning degree. It was interesting. I was sitting in Manila thinking about where I'd go, next. And for school, I knew I wanted a master's degree. I got turned down from my 2 MBA programs I'd wanted to go to. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. So I was looking at a Harvard book, actually, and it was talking about this Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT. And I was like, wow, that is weird. What is that? I really honestly didn't know what planning was, but that set the trajectory for my current life, honestly. So MIT was my home for a couple of years. I'm still pretty active. I'm on their visiting committee now and helping them to think about how to continue to integrate climate action throughout their curriculum, which I think they do a great job of. But yeah, that was cool to come out, from this international experience and really focus in on how we can better approach planning for sustainability. And that at that time, it was mostly about water for me. I'm a big, water person, stormwater, sewer water, potable water. So it was a great experience, especially, I'm sure you know this too, like how much you learn from your peers. And having a few years between undergrad and college gave me a lot more questions to ask, honestly, about, the way to lead one's life as a professional. So.
Yeah. And I noted on your extensive resume that you're also a guest lecturer at Harvard in the executive education program. So
yeah, I was doing that for a while. They have a program, especially in their Center for it's their real estate executive ed. So trying to help really raise the specter of where risk fits in an investment portfolio that has to do with physical assets that are fixed. Because real estate's really kind of in the eye of the storm when it comes to climate resilience around the world.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk a lot about the climate resiliency consulting that you're doing, which you've done since 2016. So you're coming up on 10 years. But what are the big highlights between getting your master's degree at MIT and that you had? I was looking at your resume, and you've had so many different positions.
Yeah. Well, I think I really enjoyed a moment just out of grad school where I was working for a large engineering firm that's now called MWH. And, I was really the only social scientist there, which is what urban planners are. And it was striking to me how much I had to learn about engineering and about the physical world. So it was another great education. You get your master's, but then you get another education in school. I mean, I'm sorry, in your profession. Yeah. So it was really cool. I worked on the Three Gorges Dam project, which is one of the reasons why I ended up leaving MWH, because, it's kind of hard to imagine, but we were working to figure out how to flood out many villages in order to serve the voracious appetite for electricity. And that's one way to look at the program. The other is that, we were really helping China to emerge from a second world economy into a first world economy. But anyway, it was so interesting working on a project of that size and, being someone who was really focused on how communities were going to survive and thrive in the context of this change, both the winners and the losers. So that was pretty neat.
That relocated like 1 million people, right?
Or maybe even more. Yeah.
Even more. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we were working with the World Bank, and they have a whole program for that. And, before and after Three Gorges, they have done many other relocations. It's interesting because now in my work, we do work with communities that are actually wanting to relocate due to climate change risks.
Yeah.
So it's still top of mind, although for obviously very different reasons.
Yeah. Boy, that's incredible. So, okay. So let's just jump right to your current works. And you've had all sorts of clients. You've been doing this for almost 10 years now. How did you hone in on resilience? Was Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth that sort of caught you, like many of us, or?
Yeah, that's interesting. I was working for the city of Chicago in 2005, and the mayor had a climate action plan, and it was one of the first in the world. Like Los Angeles was beginning one, Boston had something, Toronto,
Yep.
London, New York. So we were in this a refined group that were focused on climate action. And the mayor was super interested in things like green roofs and stormwater management, but those didn't fit well in a greenhouse gas reduction climate action plan, right? They fit well in the context of resilience and adaptation. So I really kind of glommed onto that, because the thing that I find so fascinating, as at that time I was a civil servant serving the residents of Chicago, is that greenhouse gas reduction is pretty ethereal, and you don't necessarily always see benefit to specific communities. I mean, you and I were just talking about some microgrid work that you're doing, Ted, that is going to bring very specific benefits to communities, but a lot of other greenhouse gas reduction doesn't actually have that. So I was so intrigued by the opportunity to serve, especially the more vulnerable residents of Chicago, with adaptation. So that was back in 2005. And that really set me on a course to see who else is doing this. Very few people, especially in the sustainability space, because for the last decade and a half, I've been like the persona non grata. Since if you're in the greenhouse gas reduction space, I'm the one who might actually be suggesting that there hasn't been enough greenhouse gas reduction, and now we have to adapt.
I was going to pick on on the subject.
Okay, pick it up.
I used to work for ICLEI, and we did all the early greenhouse gas inventories in Europe, the climate action plans. I worked in Chicago on the climate action plan there, but I always resisted adaptation. I said, come on, guys and gals, sorry. We don't want to have to adapt. We need to stop polluting the atmosphere. We need to sequester like crazy, so that we don't have to go through this adaptation. But sounds like pretty early off in your career, you said, no, we're going to need to adapt, and we're going to really need to prepare for a changing climate.
Yeah, I mean, for me, we in Chicago are known for something quite illustrious, which is that over 750 people died unnecessarily in an extreme heat event.
I remember.
And I was just starting in Chicago. I didn't work at the time for the city, but those were Black and brown Chicagoans, many of them in poverty. And it was just really striking, like, oh, wow, this is going to happen in the 1990s. What does it mean when you look at the trajectory of where climate change could go? This is back in 2005. We were making plans for 2010 and 2020 and 2030 commitments of net zero. But anyway, the thing that really struck me was I was working for the mayor, who was a very proactive mayor on greenhouse gas reduction, and it was very hard. We were not actually going to be able to meet our targets. It was just going to be very hard. I could see that. So if a city like Chicago, which is relatively wealthy, that has a very active mayor and an entire department of environment and a lot of active, nonprofits and, a community that was very invested, if we weren't going to be able to do it, how could possibly the world find its way? So it just seemed like the writing was on the wall to me. And I don't ever mind being the person that folks shun because I'm a little out there. It's important to trailblaze, because ultimately we have people's lives to save here. And that's for me like a really important part of what resilience is about.
Right. And following Bill McKibben's work and the 350.org parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. And what are we at now? It's like 420 or even higher, right?
Yeah.
We've fallen way short of our goals. But let's hone in on the distinction between adaptation and resilience. And I think I picked this up in your book. I was reading through your new book last night. And I think you see adaptation as being primarily focused on infrastructure, whereas resilience is really the human dimension of that. It's what do the people do? What kinds of steps do they take to? Am I capturing that fairly correctly? Or
well, I would think so. I mean, here's how. First of all, number one, definitions are important, but they're not. I'm happy to listen to someone else and say that definition sounds good to me. So I'm not going to be dogmatic about a definition, but I would say that to me, resilience is really about saving people's lives based upon a changing environment. And then I wouldn't necessarily juxtapose it to adaptation as much as I would to sustainability, which is, of course, where I grew up in the sustainability world, which is more about saving the environment from humans. So you see this difference, like saving humans from changes in the environment versus saving the environment from human what changes humans are bringing to it.
Yeah.
And then the other part that I think is really fundamental about resilience is that it's very much based on future predictions, science-based future predictions.
Mm-hmm.
And adaptation is too. But that is such a different world from sustainability. Even the word sustainability isn't necessarily speaking to future change. It's talking about sustaining something. And resilience is really, it forces us to look at a future that's so different from our past. Yeah. So that's often how I try to help people understand, like, what is the difference between what we're doing today and what resilience might be? It has everything to do with these future predictions of change, and also about saving humans from the changes that are coming and are here already.
So you're so eloquent. Let's cover like sort of the breadth of the climate change. I always say more frequent and ferocious events, but what kinds of events are you advising on? Flooding, I assume flooding, drought, fire.
Yeah, those three are big.
And more, and more.
Yeah, wind is also a big one. And I want to just pick apart flooding for a moment.
Sure.
I mean, you and I are recording within about a month of the extraordinary tragedy of flash floods in Texas.
Yeah.
I'm from Boulder, Colorado, which has a history of flash floods as well that, make the big time news. So there's flash floods, there's coastal flooding, which can be what we call sunny day flooding, where, just because of a king tide, that is the biggest tide of the month, you have flooding inland. Or there can be coastal flooding that also relates to having more significant storms, because as the water increases in temperature, let's say, along the Gulf, it means that you can actually get a lot more water evaporating into the storm itself, and it therefore increases the ferocity of that storm. In general, what we say about the work that we're doing is that we're thinking about extreme weather from the perspective of it being more intense, more frequent, and a longer duration for any of the weather events that we already have experienced.
I love the use. I love the fact that you use the word ferocity.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a real word. Oh no, Ted, look it up.
I use it all the time, so I'm hoping it's adequate. My
ferocious.
Grandfather was a doctor of letters, and he was always picking on me for that. But now, what kinds of clients are you or have you been advising?
Well, the biggest set of folks that have been desiring our work have been typically in the sector that supports city government or supports state government or supports communities. And so we're looking at, for instance, the U.S. Climate Alliance. Your listeners may know that is the network of governors that have signed on to the Paris Agreement. Yeah. And it started in 2016 when the U.S. government, the federal leadership, decided that we might pull out of the Paris Agreement. So that is a network of these governors. It's changed over time. We are, one of their resilience advisors. Similarly, we worked with a lot of cities through groups like the Pre-Disaster Housing Initiative or the Community Change Technical Assistance. And these are programs that are typically funded by the feds. And then I'll end with that we've increasingly had a lot of federal work until recently. The federal government has been very keen on supporting resilience in communities. So I just mentioned, we focus on cities and states, but ultimately, those who have some of the biggest needs and some of the best ideas for resilience are actually at an even more granular scale. And that is the community leaders that are trying to get resilience hubs put in, or trying to figure out transfer-oriented development for their elderly populations, or focused on public health for their children when there's extreme heat situations. So, those are some of the things that we have had the sectors that we've focused on.
Now, President Trump signed an executive order. I don't know if it's an executive order that went into place or not, but basically to take resilience away from FEMA, away from the feds, and push it back to the states and the cities. Is that affecting your work? It sounds like you're primarily working with the lower levels of government anyway.
Well, for sure.
Maybe more help now, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say that I think it's been a big wake-up call for states
Yeah.
just to start there, because even at the state emergency management agency level, SEMAs,
Mm,
SEMA,
mm,
many of the staff there were actually funded by the federal government. So
yep.
while the federal government is essentially saying, states are going to be responsible for a lot of disaster recovery, it also means that states have to look for money in the couch cushions for even positions that had previously been funded by the federal government.
Yeah.
And I do mean money in the couch cushions, because resilience, although you and I might think about it from the perspective of being a huge cost burden, and it definitely is. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, if we build resilience into the things that we do at the government scale anyway, we definitely can see so much cost benefit. I mean, you and I were talking about grandparents earlier. My grandmother used to say to me, Joyce, a stitch in time saves 9. And she is so right about resilience, right?
Yeah.
It pays itself back in avoided losses, but also in the dividend of a collateral benefit from resilience.
Yeah.
So we definitely see a huge change given the Trump administration's policies, putting the responsibility for disaster recovery on states. But one more thing I wanted to say about cities, and that is that the rubber has always met the road with cities. When it's not a federal declared disaster, it's not a state declared disaster, when they're just anticipating changes to the climate, cities really have the ultimate responsibility for their constituents. And so while this is sort of harrowing for cities, that the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, things that you were probably speaking with your guests about, over the course of the last couple of years, are no longer, flowing money out to these communities. I think cities are really well aware in many cases that, they have bonding authority. They have to have balanced budgets. They have constituents who are increasingly aware of risk, but also facing their own increase in costs from insurance and recovery costs. So, but I would say that I don't think cities necessarily at this very moment are yet feeling quite as much of the pinch of the federal changes on the resilience side as the states are.
Yeah, interesting. Let's talk about the book. You just come up with a new book. I framed it up in the intro there. And it's really a guidebook, very practical. You have a checklist and all the kinds of things that I would expect to see in a well-written guidebook. Why did you decide to focus on small businesses for this book?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for us, where our mission is to save lives and improve livelihoods in the face of climate change disruption. So we're saying, look, climate change is coming and climate change is here. What are the things that we need to do that will both serve our communities for facing that grave threat, but also will solve some of the problems that we already have, like lack of access to potable water, or stormwater that is putting, sewage water in people's basements, or, playgrounds that aren't yet fit for purpose for heat. So we really were intrigued by the point that small businesses are often left out of those conversations. And in fact, we were talking just a moment ago about federal resources. There's very little in the course of the resilience decade that we've had that has been focused squarely on small business. There's a small business SBA, but FEMA and HUD don't have. HUD is Housing and Urban Development. They don't have a lot of stuff focused on small business. And frankly, small businesses have a huge problem. Only 26% of small business has an actual disaster plan, while 94% believe they are ready to handle a disaster. So there's this real dissonance because we also know that in the past, 1 in 3 small businesses have reported weather-related financial loss. This was even as recently as 2024, but 40% never reopen after a disaster. And that 40% number is based upon historical data from the last decade. So
they just can't bounce back. They don't have the deep pockets to, like a larger business, to be able to come back, like you're saying.
Yeah, and
I was shocked by that number. Shocked by that number that 1 in 3 small businesses in that 10-year period has had a climate-related disaster that costs them a heck of a lot of money.
Yeah, and these are things that do not make the news. These can be a flood event from a river that's nearby that's too small for it to be even in the local news. It's a Facebook maybe kind of viral thing, but it doesn't actually turn into something that the public and civil servants and the corporate sector cares about. And what's really true, and you and I know this, I think you work for what would probably be called a small business. That's anything under 500 people. But there are 33 million small businesses in the United States. They make up half the US workforce, and it's 44% of our GDP. So if I'm out to build resilience, which includes economic resilience, I have to be sure that I am not ignoring the small business sector. And also, of course, the small business sector is a part of the resilience solution set.
Yeah.
Anything you and I might want for our clients, be it like more crop per drop for an agricultural project we have, for their drought mitigation, or a new paint that mitigates wildfire on, storage buildings, or, a way to consider green roofs in the context of heat mitigation. Small business is at the heart of every one of those solutions.
Yeah,
so when
absolutely.
we're talking about them as being very vulnerable, we're also really aware of the fact that they're part of the solution that's going to bring us to a resilient future.
And I presume you think that every small business should have a plan, right? And that's tough, because in another part of the book, you're talking about how all these weather-related or climate-related events are less predictable, so that the planning becomes even more obtuse or more challenging.
Yeah, it does. But, and I think the biggest part about planning is that it's hard to make time to plan. If you're a small business and you have to plan for some future, it is just the resources to do that. There was an article recently that I think came out from McKinsey saying, why every CEO should also be a chief resilience officer. And I was just laughing, because if you work with small businesses like we do, every CEO is a chief resilience officer, and he's also the chief financial officer or the chief human resources officer. I mean, he holds the key to the castle, which could be a really wonderful fact, so that he can actually do the things he needs to do, since he knows how all of his systems work. He doesn't rely on a C-suite to do that. But it also means that, there isn't a lot of time for planning.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. What about let's talk about relocating, because that's a contentious issue. And by the way, my dear friend who was just here for a couple of weeks moved from Denver to Asheville, North Carolina a few years ago, because he and his wife wanted to move somewhere that would be, pretty safe in terms of climate change. And then of course, Helene came in and wiped out the entire town. But we've had towns and cities along the Mississippi River that have been flooded again and again and again, and people just go back and rebuild there.
I know.
What's your reaction to that? I mean, it seems illogical, but then you've got that emotional tie to one's homeland, right?
Well, I mean, it is an incredibly emotional thing to lose one's home or one's business. And the first thing you want to do is claw it back. I mean, this is just human nature. And also, you want to be able to say, oh, well, this was an act of God. It would never happen.
Never happen again. That's right.
That is just, I mean, of course, that's our resilience as humans, to want to go back and do it again. When we fail in one time, this is like our sports, like get back out there, stand up after you fall on the track. That's right. But then the second is to assume that it's never going to happen again. I think that there are a few things that we see in the relocation prospects for small business. One is that, small businesses really need help to be acting in a very informed way. And I agree with your point about planning, but I do think that AI makes the future scenario stuff for small business so much easier. So I don't want to let them off the hook. They can find out information about their hazards and future hazards so much more readily than they ever could. Realtor.com, just type in your address. You'll be shocked by what you see when you go to the map there and look at the various environmental layers like flooding and air quality and wildfire. But that aside, I do think that a small business does need help from local governments who need to be honest with their constituents about we're not going to be able to keep renourishing this beach. And so if you're on the boardwalk and you have a bodega on the boardwalk, you guys should be looking to something in the next 5 or 10 years, because it could be that this beach will not be here. Or they need to be fair about we can't keep renovating this road, or, the wildfire risks in this very small community are grave. And I think that when you hear this, you hear it a second time and hear it a third time, or maybe you experience a second time, experience a third time, it begins to become a little bit more feasible to imagine relocation. And there's one other piece, and then I'll quiet on this because I know we need to wrap here soon, but seeing other communities that have successfully relocated can be very, very powerful for, people who need to be planning, not for relocating tomorrow. This is always a decision that's a 5 or 10 year time horizon, unless you get really wiped out. But thinking about, well, that could be me. And actually, I could be better off, have more customers, less stress, more ability to serve my community as a small business if I made this move, 200 feet, 20 miles, 200 miles, 2,000 miles, whatever it is. Because I think that's the calculus that many small businesses are thinking about now that have been hit hard.
And as I said in the intro, you really hit on this notion that resilience can be a business advantage.
Totally.
And again, it may be like your mother said or your grandmother said, planning ahead will save you much money or in the long run.
Totally. I mean, businesses that prepare, they win customer loyalty, they recover faster, they capture market share that others who are shuttered can't capture. And insurers, investors, regulators, they're all looking for these resilience signals. So it's important.
Now, what's your model for the book? Are you selling the book or the guide, or are you expecting some of your city clients to distribute it to their small businesses, or all of the above, or how do you?
All the above. It's a low price. It's actually going to be launched on the 2nd of September, which is National Preparedness Month.
All right.
And most of us in the climate world and in the sustainability world don't even know what that month is, but it's becoming more of an urgent thing for all of us to be thinking in those terms. So, and we are, we do a lot of free webinars, and there's free materials available on our website. And we're also, very much working with our existing clients on how they can better serve their small business communities.
And what is your website for our listeners?
It's a long one, but easy to remember: climateresilienceconsulting.com. And that's resilience with a CE at the end, Resilience Consulting.
It'll be after September 2nd, which is just around the corner here, Joyce. They'll be able to get their book from your website.
Perfect. Exactly.
Oh, that's great. What are you most proud of with your work?
I'm definitely most proud of sticking with the resilience community. It's a very small group of folks who started in the resilience sector 20 years ago. And, we have faced headwinds for sure. Unfortunately, now we have tailwinds. Those tailwinds are all of the extreme events that have occurred and are increasing in their ferocity, to use that wonderful word again. But it's important to support one another, because knowing what we know can be a little overwhelming at times. And so I'm proud of being part of a group that, and I'm talking about a big group, right? Not just like a couple folks that really figures out the best way to be pioneering and be supportive and empathetic while also being tough love. Let's get this move on so that you are not moved out by your, not by your own desire.
Yeah, really well put. Last question. And it seems like you have a very fulfilling career. Congratulations. Balance. What do you do? What do you do outside of work that keeps those batteries recharged?
Oh, I love that question. I love to garden, and I love to give away my plants to my neighbors. I live in a really urban place, and I'll just put little pots of jade plants, that I've rooted on this front stoop of our house, and folks come and sweep it up. So that's always fun. And I love to hike. I don't do as much as I'd like to, because I'm here in Chicago, but any chance I get to walk or hike in a natural environment is just like, my absolute happy space.
Very good. Hey, thanks for being on the podcast.
Ted, thank you so much. You do such important work in all the different parts of your career, and I'm really honored to be a part of your guest list.
Oh, thank you so much. That's it. Thanks for listening to Flanagan's EcoLogic. We'll see you next time.